Take another photograph and document a life that's right. And ways consist of simple things, the days of black and white. And faces from a humble past at one with the ground.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Talkin Guff podcast with me, your host, Ruben Django Pouch. I'm just out of bed. How's everyone doing there? Are they doing all right? What's been going on in the world? We're going to get into it now in a minute. We're going to have a little chat, talk some guff. But before we do, we thought we'd just do a couple of little bits of pepper. And the first one is Jeff Bezos, the lucky little sausage. He's after building himself the largest super yacht in the whole entire world. The largest and most expensive, should I say. And so it's so big and so expensive that it actually has another boat that goes with it. And that boat's sort of like what most people would call a yacht. But it's a support vessel for the super yacht. It just sort of tags along, I suppose, and offers support. Like, you can do it. Come on, super yacht. We believe in you. And it turns out that the boat is so big and gaudy and grotesque that they can't even get it to the ocean. It won't fit under this rather trivial little bridge somewhere. And so they're going to take the 155-year bridge and dismantle it and allow Jeff to sail his big, massive super yacht through and then to put it back together for him. Isn't that really nice of them? It must be great being the richest man in the world. What else? Here's another mad thing that's happening. The Canadian truckers, huh? So, the Freedom Convoy of Canadian truckers have gone to Ottawa, the capital city of Canada, to protest against vaccine mandates. Now, the majority of these fellas are actually vaccinated, but they're just not into the idea of medical mandates and people losing their jobs for their own medical choices and stuff, which is great. So they've decided to protest. And the way they protest in the best way they know how. They're going to drive their trucks. So they drove their trucks up to Ottawa, and it looks fucking mental. There's just like total gridlock, you know. They give me road rage. And Justin Trudeau, who's a real slimy looking little bag of shit, and he's the president in Canada, whatever they call him. He called these people a fringe movement. He said that they no way represented the ideals and thoughts of everyday Canadian people, and they weren't welcome. And it turns out that's not true either. It turns out there's fucking millions of people who think exactly like them in Canada alone. And they've turned up in Ottawa. It looks like there could be 1 million people there. I don't know. It looks like an outrageous hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. Justin Trudeau, some might say luckily, some might say unluckily, he went ahead and he got himself COVID. And so he can't meet the truckers and he can't have a discussion about invasive policy and medical mandates and all that stuff. So he's not going to. And they said they'd wait in Ottawa. So they're just there. There's fucking loads of them. And I just think it's interesting that the media and the establishment, shall we say, describe these people as a fringe group. And then I think Elon Musk, in fairness to him, whom I'm not a big fan of, because his dad's a white slave owner, but he put up a thing that said, it turns out the government are the fringe. It's really interesting that this idea that this fringe movement are just out to disrupt people, but then they turn up and there's fucking hundreds of thousands of them. And at what point do you go, oh, right, so this is valid. This is how people actually feel. Or do you just keep saying, fringe, that's fringe, you're fringe, they're crazy, they're right-wingers. The Freedom Convoy is right-wing. And then, and a result of that is that someone set up a GoFundMe page to support the Freedom Convoy, because I suppose they'd need food, accommodation, shelter and all while they're waiting out in Ottawa to get an out conversation with Justin Trudeau. They set up a GoFundMe and they raised like $8 million US, I think 10 million Canadian dollars. And GoFundMe, and this is mental, this is really crazy and it doesn't look democratic at all. GoFundMe took that money and decided that it wouldn't be given to the people who set up the GoFundMe page in good faith and to the people who donated to the GoFundMe page in good faith. That's irrelevant. As a result of pressure from the government, GoFundMe have taken that money and they've decided not just to automatically return it to every donator, but they've decided to keep it and spread it out amongst charities they deem to be worthy. Now, if that's not a real red flag or a warning sign for, like, surely then the establishment could just do that with your money. You know, that money you have in the bank that you're saving, surely the establishment could just someday go, no, you can't have that anymore. And I just think that that's crazy, no? I think that that's surely one of the most undemocratic things I've ever seen. And it may be evidence to the fact that in spite of how sort of progressive and whatever all of these tech companies seem and the sort of the progressive nature in which they're developed, at some stage when loads of money gets involved, they're just part of the machine. They suck the devil's dick and they'll take your money. They took 10 million Canadian dollars and just said, no, we don't agree. Oh, and here's the thing, it's just, they said, because it's promoting hate. And I'm perplexed as to how the Freedom Convoy promotes hate. And I'm pretty sure if you look into any reports, the whole thing is just like, it's totally like friendly, non-violent protest. And I just think that's crazy, isn't it? It's that freedom represents hate. And therefore you can't have the money that was raised via a GoFundMe page in the name of freedom, because that's hate. That's bizarre, no? Anyway, moving on from that, and it sort of segues us nicely into today's episode. We're going to revisit an episode that we did before when Len and Rob were with us. It was episode 2. It was called The Death of the Age of Conversation / Divided We Fall. And the point was that, yes, we did think there was a death in conversation, but it's a subset or a byproduct of division. Maybe the more we allow ourselves to be divided, the less likely we are to have healthy discourse and good conversations and potentially come to resolutions. Wouldn't that be mad? So I wanted to go back on parts of it and see how it's relevant today, if it even is relevant today, or if it was even relevant when we put it out. It's been exactly a year, so little celebration. I've been doing the podcast a year. Obviously started it with Rob and Len. Now a year later I'm doing it on my own, and I'm happy. I'm proud that I've stuck with it, and I'm now on episode 27. So that would go to show you that I haven't really released it very consistently, but I've tried my absolute best, and I hope people are enjoying the podcast. And if they are, they should comment and like and subscribe. And in fact, even if they aren't, they can do those things as well. We were definitely, the sort of main theme of that podcast was that there seemed to be no conversation, seemed to be no real healthy discourse between the left and the right, I suppose, and by default, no real resolution. That a lot of these conversations and arguments and social justice issues that were happening around the world weren't actually getting resolved. It was just people screaming at each other and potentially even punching each other and stuff like that. And that doesn't seem to be a place that we want to be. I would have thought we want to be in a place that, in spite of people's differing opinions, we try to encourage healthy discourse so that people can at least live in simpatico. You know, we mightn't understand it, but we're definitely not going to resolve any situations by shouting in each other's faces. And like, I love a good ruck, you know, but I do fundamentally believe that. And maybe that time is passing more rapidly by the day. The time for healthy discourse and resolution might in fact be beyond us. And another trend in and around that time was, whilst we were talking, or another trend we were discussing within that podcast was the idea that you were either, 100% this or the enemy, and that there seemed to be a lot of generalizing and labeling going on at the time, and again, not really a clear path to healthy discourse / resolution. I think I made a point then that the left had gone from being the voice of reason to sort of aggressively narrow-minded. Like, we always assumed the right wing were a bit fucking, like, you know, crazy. And the left, you know, the liberals had to sort of try and open up the conversation and be the voice of reason within the situation and go, you can't do that. That's oppressive. It's fascist. It's, you know what I mean? We're the left. We want to liberate. We want to be liberal. And Len made a great point, because at one point he likens, and like I was watching Bill Maher say something recently, and whether or not you like Bill Maher, I'm not saying I'm a huge Bill Maher fan. I don't know a whole lot of Bill Maher, but I thought some of the stuff he was saying in this monologue, he did a monologue. He mentions in that point that the people creating, like that, the people we're talking about are actually a very finite group of lefties. And they've lost their minds, they're stark raving lunatics, and the rest of the left is too afraid to call them out. The rest of the left is too afraid to put these lunatics in their place, and it's probably quite damaging for the whole left movement in general. But at one point, Len likens that finite group of lefties to like Daesh or ISIS, right? And I thought it was really good, and he did this. He had there's a deadly quote here. It says, "The conflict is now the purpose, the end game." Like, do these people imagine a world where all the people who disagree with them die? They disappear? And it's beautifully put. And a year later, when Len's not with me anymore, it brings a little tear to my eye. But I thought that was great, and it's really interesting. It's like, is that what you like? You know, now you have to fuck off, die. You have to die. You're a misogynist. You're a racist. You know, you should die. Disappear, at least. Our world there's no place for you. And I'm not promoting racism or misogyny, but again, it's that thing of like, unless you agree 100% with this narrative, you're that. You're a bigot or a misogynist or a racist relative to the issue we're talking about. You get what I'm saying. Don't you? Don't cancel me. And definitely, when I look around the world today, which is 12 months later, because I'm doing the podcast a year, I don't feel that has changed. I don't feel like that lack of conversation, that lack of healthy discourse has changed. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's gotten worse. Because not only like are the left no longer the voice of reason, but they're sort of no longer the left in a weird sort of way. And we're going to have a look at that. I've been noticing that more and more in the last 2 years, especially with the suppression of conversation and censorship that you see around the place, and how that was validated by the idea that, or validated by the pandemic, I suppose, and people who I would consider to be left-leaning and liberal. I started to notice some sort of slightly draconian right-wing tendencies. And in the last little while, it's sort of gotten hard to avoid. And one of the first things is I'm going to read an article. So obviously there was an article a while ago, and we've touched on it before in the Rolling Stone, about the 270 doctors that wrote an open letter to Spotify, sort of demanding that they do something about his misinformation. Now, I'm not going to read the whole article, because I'm not getting into the content of the article. I'm not getting into the content of the letter. I don't want to argue any of that stuff. So it's, again, Katrine. There's loads. Basically, we know the story ourselves, but then this woman, Katrine Wallace, PhD, University of Illinois, says that she considers Rogan a menace to public health for continuously platforming anti-vaccine ideology to his enormous audience. And this is what she goes on to say: having things like this on the Joe Rogan podcast give a platform to these people and makes it a false balance, which I think is totally crazy. This is what really bothers me, she tells Rolling Stone. These are fringe ideas not backed in science, and having it on a huge platform makes it seem there are two sides to this issue, and there are really not. The overwhelming evidence is the vaccine works and it is safe. So look, I mean, I could say straight off the mark, you don't actually have the prerequisite data to tell us that the vaccine is safe over a 5 to 10 year period. You don't have that, right? And I could say that, and it doesn't matter. I could also say that the overwhelming evidence of the vaccine is that it doesn't stop the spread of coronavirus whatsoever. And we know that because coronavirus has been raging through highly vaccinated countries. Now, at the same time, the deaths and the hospitalizations haven't been going through the roof. So maybe that has something to do with the vaccine. Maybe that's part of the vaccine as well. But makes it seem there are two sides to this issue, and there really are not. The overwhelming evidence is the vaccine's working and is safe. I suppose that's totally ridiculous. And I said this before in a podcast. To communicate that there's not two sides to any narrative is totally insane. And it's something we teach our children is total bullshit. We tell our kids that that's a person's side of the story, there's this person's side of the story, and somewhere in the middle is the truth. And that's a fact, regardless of the setting. And it's the same for this situation. You know, what makes it that we can trust these doctors but not these doctors? The whole idea that there's no conversation to be had, there's only one side to this story is totally bonkers, in my opinion. And it's not left-leaning. It's not a liberal ideal, in my opinion, whatsoever. In fact, it seems totally right-wing to me to go on like that, to communicate that idea. Anyway, let's keep going. Because here's another thing. Is that guy Robert Malone... And even saying in the start of this article that he touts himself as an architect of mRNA technology. And I don't know a whole heap about Robert Malone, but I do know that he does, in fact, hold 9 patents regarding the development of mRNA vaccine technology. And so I suppose he gets to tout himself as one of the architects, doesn't he? And even that, do you understand? Do you see where I'm coming from? That it's sort of bias and it's sort of punching home the idea that these people are crazy and anyone who agrees with them is a fringe lunatic, basically. Because it says that this is shared, these are views that are fringe and shared within right-wing circles. And it's just like, no, Joe Rogan's actually the most watched podcast on the planet. He's actually watched 1,000% more than CNN, any of them. Like, that's what's going on in the world. And again, why do you think that is the case? And therefore, why do you think people want to eschew the establishment narrative and hang on to something that seems more whatever to them? And at what point did we decide that people weren't able to disseminate for themselves? How come people can't take in all the information available to them and disseminate for themselves what the truth is? Why does the government have to overreach? Why do they think people are unable to make up their own minds? And do you think that is left? Do you think that's a liberal idea? That, no, these people are... We're going to just make sure that they can never make the wrong decision? That's totalitarian, no? Is that not totally right-wing? And it's being promoted in a left-leaning liberal publication, Rolling Stone, the rock and roll magazine. And I think then for them to promote the idea that there's not two sides to this, there's no discussion to be had here, is totally ridiculous and totally right-wing. You know what I mean? The other thing about that is that we know that article is erroneous to a degree. We know that over 100 of those 270 doctors are actually PhD candidates, which are students, really. And does it seem very... I don't know, do you not find that untrustworthy for people to promote that when it's not true? And then is that not misinformation? We also know that the Rolling Stone magazine put out an article that said that a gunshot wound victim had died in a hospital because someone was overdosing on the horse dewormer ivermectin, and that turned out to be actually a total fallacy. They made that up. And so again, is that misinformation? And does that seem liberal to you in your opinion? You know, another weird thing that I took from that, when I read that article, and I didn't want to get into the whole thing, when I start arguing with the article in my head, by default I must be right wing. And I mean, I might be a lot of things. I might be a flawed human being and a total fucking nutcase at times, but I certainly wouldn't have thought I was right wing. And now, obviously, the Joe Rogan situation is everywhere, huh? Media keeps pointing at it like it's some sort of viral internet campaign, like to cancel Joe Rogan. And it's literally a few nobodies complaining about only 2 episodes, which is mad considering that he has over 1,000 episodes. There's 2 that certain people take exception to. And now, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, there's a big cancel Joe Rogan campaign going on. And the media loves that. And we'll have a look at a few of these nobodies that were complaining about the 2 episodes. Now, number 1 is Meghan and Harry. Meghan Markle and Harry... What's his name? Sir Harry King. Harry Windsor, they're up in arms about it, and they have shown displeasure to Spotify. And I suppose who really gives a fuck about them two clout chasing losers? And an interesting point, and I don't really like to quote Piers Morgan too much, but an interesting point that he made is like, you've been paid $25 million by this company to create a podcast, and you've given them one shit episode, and you have the audacity to tell them what the rest of their content should be, you know? We discussed already, obviously, Neil Young, which was really upsetting, I suppose. The OG himself turns out to be a total plank who wants to suppress conversations and censor people. Joni Mitchell, I suppose, who gives a fuck, really? You know, it's just like, these are like, Joni Mitchell actually looks like the bride of Weldenstein. She looks like a fucking plastic surgeon's wet dream who's been propped up and pumped full of Adderall and pushed through the door to make some statement. It's bullshit. Who cares? Like, honestly. And are you mental? You're talking about the suppression of conversation when you don't actually really know one way or the other what's true. You don't. None of us do. Don't lie to yourself. Sharon Stone. I mean, oh, fucking hell. Sharon Stone. I have to find it because she's a fucking twat, obviously. Sharon Stone speaks out on Joe Rogan. Like, why? Who are you? You're totally irrelevant, Sharon Stone. No one wants to see your rotten old fanny. You know, you're 30 years ago, bitch. No one cares. So he's risking people's lives with his idiocy, apparently. COVID is not an opinion-based situation, and Mr. Rogan thinking that his opinion or disclaimer for the lives he personally has affected and caused losses of. It's not an opinion, she said. Like, what a fucking idiot. Does no one else see how that's totally fucking ridiculous? And this is promoted in RTE, and like I said, the media want to sort of label this as some fucking woke viral internet campaign, and it's not. It's completely the opposite. You know that all of this is completely the opposite of being woke. He should put a disclaimer that he's an asshole and that his behaviour is dangerous and affecting people's lives and deaths. Like, straight away, it's really obvious that she's a total moron who has no sort of cognitive ability to enter into a real conversation about the situation. So she just spews diatribe. No one gives a fuck, Sharon. You're totally irrelevant. You're totally out of your depth. And get back in your box. Couple other saps, like literally nobody's, to come out and said, we're getting off Spotify. And I saw the article. I was like, I don't have a fucking clue who you people are. So again, irrelevant nobodies. And this one's really sad. Stuart Lee, the British comedian. This one blew my mind. I can't get my mind around it, because whether or not you agree with it, you're talking about the censorship and suppression of it. At what point does that become an option? When did that ever do us right in the past? And I just would have assumed that these people, the aforementioned people and other people involved in this situation, are liberals, and yet they are outraged at discussion and opposing narrative from experts. Because like I said, Robert Malone, compared to me, he's an expert. And if I can't believe him, then I don't know who to believe. You know what I mean? If I can't believe him, why should I believe these other experts? I don't know. It's really confusing time for people. But I do know in my heart that the suppression of conversation is right-wing. It's not liberal whatsoever. You know, and this is what I'm talking about with the left becoming, no longer being the left. And I think it's funny that all of these people talk about, and I think Stuart Lee talks about the checks and balances of mainstream media. And they all are saying that he's spreading these lies and this information. And I just find that that's so out of touch. It's so naive and strangely conservative. Because we know that the media is a bunch of lying scumbags who say whatever they want, whenever they want, for one reason only. Not to inform the masses, but to sell newspapers, to get people to click into their website. So the advertising companies have to pay. It's clickbait. It's bullshit. And I'm really surprised. Like, the Stuart Lee one really got me. It really got me. I just couldn't understand. And so I think it's totally ridiculous for all of these people to be talking about, you know, the checks and balances of mainstream media when we know that's bullshit. Sure, in the Rolling Stone article, we know that, like, one after the other, they're just literally publishing erroneous articles. It's crazy. The left has become authoritarian. That's what that looks like to me. And I just think that that's so oxymoronical. We have an authoritarian left. Not liberal, you know. Again, I'll just say suppression of conversation, government overreach, censorship, the boycotting of discourse, etc. These are now liberal ideas. That's totally crazy to me. All these artists, etc., who would usually trash the establishment whenever it suited them, have now kowtowed, you know, to outrageous government mandates and coercion, and want to now instead trash normal everyday people who want to be in charge of their own choices. This is like an Illuminati wet dream, if you believe in such a thing, but like doing everything the government says and big business says is now liberal. And if you want to question the government or the establishment narrative at all, you're right wing. This is a right wing circle, you're a fringe group. I just think that that's crazy, no? What does everyone else think about that? Please comment in the comment section below. And like I said before, I'm a liberal, and I think the idea that listening to Joe Rogan is somehow right wing, I think that's totally absurd. How at any point could listening to loads of people talk about different topics and trying to come up with your own opinion, form your own opinion, how could that ever be considered right wing? I read articles like that Rolling Stone one, and I hear people saying things like there's only one opinion and one narrative, and if you say otherwise, you're right wing. I think that's totally ludicrous. And I think the people who create all this, they're fundamentalists, and fewer in number than you may think. I also think that's what I'm talking about. You know, I'm just looking around going, Jesus, look at those liberals being liberal and can't understand. Like, I've got, oh yeah. Here's another thing I wanted to say. It's that, like, I used to play gigs, and it was always, and we used to do a lot of gigs for sort of little to no money under the basis, the prerequisite that, you know, this is a community and we're all loving life, you know. Really liberal people. And those same liberals are putting on gigs, or had been putting on gigs in the last 6 months, only vaccinated people, for people who only agreed to a coerced trial drug. And I thought that was mad. I thought it was the total antithesis of being liberal. I just thought that's surely right wing and conservative. It's like, only we're doing exclusive gigs for people who got the medicine the government asked them to, without question. That was what happened. And yet, so how couldn't you people, and you know who you are on a local level, are you now right wingers? Is that the buzz? Or are you authoritarians masquerading as peace-loving hippies? Bullshit. I think this whole situation is driven by the media for sensational headlines and sensational profits, as I've already said. And my good friend Noel Healy called this the age of spin, and I just thought that was perfect. That's exactly what this is, the age of spin. And we're being spun out of control, and we shouldn't fall for it. Let's not fall for it, because a lot of this stuff is just designed to divide us, in my opinion. And it's totally, like I said there, here's a weird one, and I'm going to try and articulate it as best I can before we wrap it up for the day. I won't go into this other topic that I was going to talk about because it'll get me in trouble. But I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that I really think now more than ever that mainstream media, they're total scumbags. And they don't really, they're a tool of the establishment to create fear and division amongst ordinary everyday people. And we shouldn't fall for it. We should no longer allow ourselves to be divided. We called that episode a year ago, Divided We Fall, and we talked about the fact that if we as human beings can't learn to talk to each other. A guy said a really interesting thing recently. He's like, now because of the internet, you can align yourself with a million other people who hold the same ideals as you, and you no longer have to get on with the people in the town that you grew up in. And so I thought that was great because, you know, we all have our principles and our priorities and our ideals, but we still have to function in the society in which we were born, and not very many people might be aligned to our ideals. And so although you can have your integrity and your priorities and your ideals, you still have to learn how to live within a community of people that mightn't have all of the same ideas as you. And now that is no longer the case, so we can just go, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you to everyone. But like I said, it's a year ago where we were discussing the fact that if we didn't figure out how to engage in healthy discourse and by default enjoy resolution of some degree, or at least a way that we can live with each other, that we were going to be in big trouble. I love you all. I've been doing this a year. I'm really happy. Thanks for tuning in. Please throw down some like and subscribes. Don't allow yourself to be divided, especially not by some fucking cocksucker, some clean shirt in the fucking establishment. Alright? Look around you. There's only 2 teams, the have and the have-nots. And there's fucking millions of us on the have-nots, and we're all brothers and sisters. Peace, love, respect, unity.
And document a life that's right. And ways consist of simple things, the days of black and white. And faces from a humble past at one with the ground, the sound